Well, hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this very special event, Freedom of the Press, Southern Challenges, National Impact. My name is Warwick Sabin, and I'm the president and CEO of Deep South Today. Deep South Today is a nonprofit network of local newsrooms that includes the newsrooms you love and rely on, Mississippi Today and Verite News. I want to kick us off by saying thank you, not only for being here today, but for financially supporting independent journalism in the Deep South. At Deep South Today, we're rebuilding and re-energizing local journalism across the region, especially in communities where it's been eroded over the years. We're here for the long haul, making sure journalism has the foundation it needs to grow and thrive. That means ensuring our journalists in your communities have the resources and support they need to tell the truth, regardless of barriers that stand in the way of transparent reporting. And we're hosting this program as a member benefit during our News Match campaign as a way to say thank you for your investment in our mission. Through News Match, your donations go twice as far. And we're grateful to the MacArthur Foundation, the Rural Partner Fund, the William and Flora Hewlett Foundation, and the Maddox Foundation for providing the support. As some of our greatest advocates, I hope all of you will encourage friends, family, and colleagues to help us take advantage of this critical moment by donating to Mississippi Today and Verite News. And there will be more opportunities for us to come together in 2025 as we bring you new member benefits. So please stay tuned for those updates. And with that said, I'm excited to introduce our panelists who will lead us through a conversation about the unique challenges facing journalists in the Deep South. They'll discuss the critical role our newsrooms play in holding power to account and explore the challenges standing in the way of our ability to report vital news, which ultimately limits the information you receive as news consumers. And we're very honored to be joined by Emily Wilkins, who is the current president of the National Press Club. She also is a CNBC correspondent for the network's Washington, D.C. bureau, covering the intersection of business, politics, and policy with a focus on Congress. Our other special guest is Bill McCarren, who is the director of the newly formed Press Freedom Center at the National Press Club. The center's mission is to assist journalists in trouble, including those who are wrongfully detained, assaulted, subjected to lawfare, or exiled from their country. Bill is also a member of the advisory board for Reporters Without Borders. And steering the conversation today are the esteemed editors-in-chief of our two newsrooms, Terry Baquet, editor-in-chief of Verite News in New Orleans, and Adam Ganucheau, editor-in-chief of Mississippi Today. I want to let you all know that this program is being recorded and will be shared across our network. So please keep yourself on mute and feel free to type any questions in the chat as we go along. We'll wrap up the conversation about 20 minutes before our scheduled end time so that we have plenty of time to answer your questions. Thank you again, and now it's my pleasure to turn things over to Adam and Terry.
Thanks so much, Warwick. What an intro. I'll say to the three folks joining me today for this panel, Emily and Bill, firstly, thank you both for being here. I think this is such an important conversation, an important moment for press in America and specifically press freedom. My colleague in New Orleans, Terry Baquet. Terry, it's good to see you here. We are fighting these very fights every single day in our respective markets and our newsrooms. And, this just couldn't be a more exciting conversation and I think a critical moment. So to kick us off, Emily, I want to start with you. For anybody on this call who isn't familiar with the National Press Club, I think just talking a little bit about who you are and what you guys do for journalism across the country might be very helpful.
Absolutely. And Adam, Terry, Warwick, thank you guys so much for having us here today. It really is an honor to be here and be discussing the work that the National Press Club has done. So the National Press Club was founded in 1908, and basically it initially started as a place for journalists and their sources to get together to talk. It does remain that today. We have a really strong membership, 2,500 journalism and communicator members, many of them in the DC area, but they are truly all across the country country and all across the globe. And the National Press Club, we have a couple different functions. We have that community aspect. We have trainings through our nonprofit, the Journalism Institute. We try to always make news. We have big guests. We do headliners events. We've had Brooke Shields. We just had Ken Burns. So it's always great to have those folks come and make a little bit of news and also subject themselves to reporter questions. And it's not just the moderator. We like to make sure we have some audience involvement and people asking things. But I think one of the really big things that is very close to the heart of many of our members, and I can say this definitively because we polled them on it last year, is press freedom. The National Press Club, and Bill can feel free to jump in here because he's been a huge leader on this. But we have committed ourselves, particularly in cases of detained American journalists, where we fought for Austin Tice's release and keeping him front of mind, for Evan Gershkovich, for Alsu Kurmasheva. Of course, we were so happy to see them freed from Russian prisons and reunited with their families. And we were a part of the campaign working with the Wall Street Journal and working with Radio Free Liberty, Radio Europe, to make sure that there was continued pressure on our key decision makers in our government, continued awareness among the public, and a continued need to kind of get them home, and even in Alsu's case, to get her a designation as a wrongfully detained person. And I do want to make sure I'm handing Bill the floor a bit here, because our biggest new initiative with the National Press Club is the Press Freedom Center. This is basically something that we began simply because a lot of the press freedom work we were doing at the Press Club was a little bit ad hoc. It was kind of, hey, here's a need, there's a need. Certainly for our Aubuchon winners, this is something where after we give the award, we stay with that news organization or that person through their case, through whatever they need. But we wanted to have a little bit more of a formalized structure around it. And we wanted to make sure that regardless of what the future of journalism holds, that the Press Club was ready and there to respond. And so I wanted to, as Bill is our esteemed director and truly a leader, not just at the Press Club, but in the press freedom space, wanted to make sure he had a minute or two to add anything he wanted to that.
Oh, thanks, Emily. And I think you hit the high points there, but we felt it was important to put a spotlight on the case at Mississippi today, and I hope we have a chance to talk about it a little bit in the future on this call. But this relationship between the club and its honorees is a longstanding method of support, and we only have a couple of these each year. We think some of the most interesting and hopeful work we can see in the country are these nonprofit newsrooms like Mississippi Today that do excellent work and are subject to abuse on the part of the community and need support. And so that's going to take a bit of a PR form now when we sort of help you in the public space. But as Emily mentioned, the center just started. We've got a couple of relationships with law firms that are going to do pro bono work. We'll see what kind of form that takes. But unfortunately, we're in this problem. We're in it together, and we hope to help. I'll just say one quick thing more about the club and the way to think about it. So there are national press clubs in 26 countries. So there's the Philippines, in Australia, in Japan, and we've helped most of them get set up and organized, but we have no kind of ownership or control. It's a sort of a loose amalgam. So this was, starting from back in the day when kind of the U.S. thought it was in a position to be exporting its model around the world. And that stretched to us as well. And, we yearn for those days. And we think, we're finding ourselves now in an interesting place where, in press freedom anyway, the U.S. ranks something like 55 in the RSF ranking this year, which is not good. And, there are lots of problems, which I think we can touch on later. But this is what the club structure is, and what we do, and what we hope to do through this new initiative.
Yeah, we're so grateful. Just full transparency, Mississippi Today, as you guys mentioned, we started a good working relationship with you guys just this year because of a defamation lawsuit that we face. I want to talk some about that, like you said, Bill, and I'm going to ask Terry in a few minutes too to sort of talk a little bit about some of the work they've done to stand up for press freedom at Verite News as well. But maybe Bill, since you're the founding director of this new center, the Press Freedom Center at the Press Club. Maybe you can talk a little bit more broadly about some of the specific abuses you mentioned, or some of the concerns that we have about press freedom in America today.
Sure. Well, in the U.S., we are starting to see some of the problems that we were fighting against around the world in authoritarian regimes, finding their way into our society. And I'll just give you a couple of examples. I mean, we all are kind of aware of the idea of wrongfully detained journalists, those that get imprisoned for charges that are, fictitious, or who are, who have had violence, perpetrated against them. So there are those things out there. They are less in the United States, but we are starting to see more of them. But a couple of years ago, we started to be focused on, I'll just give you two examples of cases. One was that of Maria Ressa in the Philippines, and the other was Rana Ayub, who's an Indian journalist, both women. Both were critical of their governments, and were they suffered a lot of direct abuse. I'm talking about unpleasant, phone calls up until threatening phone calls for violence and all kinds of things like that. But how the governments dealt with them in both cases ended up being what I would call a version of lawfare, which in a way, it's not exactly the same, but it's not dissimilar from what we see happening with Mississippi Today. So in these cases, so in the case of Maria Ressa, the government brought 9 different charges against her related to tax. And they were against her personally, but also against her business. And the way it worked was, for Maria to come to the United States to speak, she would have to go to visit these 9 different courts and get approval to travel. And she's, got U.S. citizenship. She's a joint citizen. So this was pretty unusual, but it was enough volume of fictitious cases that it caused a procedural hurdle that was almost impossible for her to overcome. So we were trying to assist her to come here to speak about something, and I was having to write separate letters to 9 separate courts. And if one of them doesn't allow her to travel, she can't leave. So burdensome, complicated, difficult, and they know enough to not just sort of, in her case, put her in jail, right? But they find these other ways. And similar thing with Rana Ayub, who's critical of the Modi government. She's been outright rejected at airports. Same thing, a bunch of fictitious cases. And it's a lot of these things are not aimed directly at the work, and this is where I think it's somewhat different situation than we are seeing with Mississippi Today, where it does seem to be aimed kind of at the work. It's about their work for these 2 women, but it's aimed at really them and their personal finances. So we're seeing this out there. We're seeing a little bit more of it here. I think we try wherever we can, in the case of Maria and Rana, to step up for them. In both cases, we gave them recognition and awards. Sometimes people had not heard of them at all, so this was new to them. The ferocity has reduced a bit for Maria after she won a Nobel Peace Prize and changing government, but she still has issues there. And in the case of Rana Ayub, she's the Modi government is still very strong there and in opposition to her. And these things ebb and flow. but there's a playbook now for authoritarian governments, and we just see, like I talked about how we sort of exported the press club concept to other countries, but we're seeing that authoritarian playbook being imported here in some degrees in the U.S., and it's concerning for the future. And I mean, so the specific things we do are run campaigns for them, which raises their visibility. In the case we arrange, speaking, help them get into the country. Here in the U.S., the kind of things that we would do to help support, journalists who are local, can run the gamut. It certainly is speaking out about them, giving platforms to journalists in the U.S. who are in trouble, and then like a variety of tactics. Last weekend we had a run for Austin Tice. This is just to help raise awareness and build community around that particular journalist. We've done things in restaurants for him, where we had hundreds of restaurants nationwide have a sponsored night for Austin Tice, where they invite people to come in and talk about the journalist. And I'm going to end here in a second, but one of the real troubling aspects of the public journalist connection is that popularity for journalists has been falling, and there are trust issues, of course. And some of these are manufactured by public statements of public officials and all kinds of reasons. But we think it's very important to highlight press freedom cases where people are doing excellent work or are suffering, enormously from an oppressive government, because that is a counter narrative to what people usually hear and think about journalists. And so the more we can remind the public that what journalists do is often brave and at great risk and truthful and has virtue, that helps. It has the added benefit of being true, but that helps to sort of counteract the general negative and growing negative feeling in the public.
Sure. Yeah. Like I said, I want to talk just for a couple quick minutes here about the situation we face here in Mississippi, that you've mentioned a couple times. So for anyone who doesn't know, in July of 2023, former Mississippi Governor Phil Bryant, who was a focus of our Pulitzer Prize winning investigative series, The Back Channel, which delved into the full extent of the state's welfare scandal, which you may have heard about because of popular figures like Brett Favre, NFL Hall of Fame quarterback, and some professional wrestlers and other high-profile folks. We were sued for defamation, and despite that was July of 2023, and despite the former governor not yet proving that anything we reported was false or defamatory, he is operating within a state court system that has kept this case going. We have been strapped with hundreds of thousands of dollars in legal fees to defend ourselves. We feel very strongly, vehemently, and have argued such that we have not defamed the former governor. We have not published anything inaccurate about his role in the scandal. Yet, this case has been caught up in the courts, and that sort of all rolled into earlier this year when a state of Mississippi judge, ordered us at Bryant's request to turn over our sources and notes and correspondences with everyone we did the reporting with, basically. As journalists, we take pretty major umbrage to that. That is something we are very careful to do, is protect our sources, to stand by our reporting and fight for it. And so we appealed the lower court's order, the judge's order, to the Mississippi Supreme Court, asking them to recognize for the first time in our state's history what's called a reporter's privilege, which is a constitutional guarantee that things like notes and interviews and sources, names of sources, are protected. So, Bill and Emily were so honored sort of to be recognized by the National Press Club this year for that work with an Obashan Press Freedom Award. We're happy to accept that next week in Washington with you guys. But that's just one example sort of what we are dealing with here. I wrote over this past summer when we filed the appeal, I wrote an op-ed for the New York Times that Bill, you just mentioned something about a playbook. I think the headline included, my headline on the op-ed included something about how the playbook for American politicians is increasingly becoming, filing bogus lawsuits that are not intended to prove defamation or falsity. They're really intended to make a news outlet spend a ton of money that they may or may not have. And in our case, as a nonprofit organization, a relatively small one, that's been such a tall task for us. So that's kind of a quick summary of what we're seeing. And we also closely cover elected officials in a state that's very similar to our counterparts at Verite News down in New Orleans. We have seen a rise in policies being enacted by these elected officials that are intended to, I think I would argue, chip away at First Amendment constitutional protections that everyone has. Terry, as the leader of Verite in New Orleans, you guys have actually engaged in some legal work yourself to sort of push back on one of those policies. I thought I'd ask you if you could just briefly talk a little bit about that case. Oh, Terry, I think we've got you muted. Hold on just a second.
No, I had me muted. I'm good at that. Um, so we're one of six plaintiffs in a federal case, over a new state law that creates a 25-foot buffer zone around police officers. So you can't film police officers unless you're 25 feet away. Um, and actually, citizens can't film police officers if they're within 25 feet. We think this law is unconstitutional, and it impedes the gathering of news and people's right to observe what officers are doing when they're on the job. Think about it. If this case was in effect in Louisiana, and we had an incident like George Floyd went through, that the filming of that case would have never happened. That case probably wouldn't have gone forward, unless you had some sort of big zoom camera or something like that. It's absolutely nuts. But in the last motion, I just asked our managing editor was in October, where the state is still trying to get the case thrown out. But it's stuff like this happening in state courts that is really impeding our ability to do good journalism and hold police accountable.
Yeah, and Terry, you can speak to this. Emily, you're a journalist, and Bill, you have been so involved with these matters for so long. I mean, these, whether it's a policy that's being passed at any level of government, whether it's a lawsuit that you may face that you're kind of stuck with having to deal with the expense and the headache of it. It all is intended to have a chilling effect on journalists, right? It's intended to sort of make us at least second guess what we do, which is sort of observe, question, and portray the stories that we know are most important. Emily, I want to kind of ask you a question. I hope it's not too tough of a question, but it's certainly one
No
that
such thing. Bring it on.
there you go. I mean, it's tough in the sense that I think every journalist in the past couple weeks in America has been really, really thinking hard about the jobs that we do, the roles that we play. given the recent election. Less than a week before November 5th presidential election, our president-elect joked about firing weapons through the press gallery at one of his rallies. This is a man who has openly, this campaign cycle, talked about how he believes that government leaders, elected officials, and whoever at large should just file defamation suits and try to, make as much money as they can against news outlets. We're talking about, rhetoric, anti-press rhetoric, jokes, or even mentions of violence toward reporters in a way that we know will be copied by others across this country, and who knows what it could inspire among just everyday Americans. As the president of the National Press Club, we're talking about everything from a lawsuit we face to policies that are being passed in Louisiana to a president joking about, murdering reporters. What are you thinking right now? I mean, what as you're in your role as this national leader in our industry, how do you feel in this moment? And, what will you be watching out for in the weeks and months to come?
No, Adam, it's a great question. And I think we were talking about this the other day with a group that included the current vice president for the National Press Club, soon to be president-elect Mike Balsamo at the AP. And he's really had some firsthand dealings with this. He covered the first Trump administration, and now he has a lot of reporters who cover the administration and policing. And the crux of the discussion was that, when people think about attacks on the media, it's not going to be that a van's going to pull up to a newsroom and police are going to jump out and handcuff reporters and throw them in the back of a van. That's not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is things exactly like you were saying, Adam. It's the lawsuits. It's the threat of lawsuits. It's coming to newsrooms that really do not have a lot of money for a legal battle. It is personal attacks on reporters. It is death threats via email or DMs or social media. It's threats from people who it's difficult to identify or see. I know with CNBC, NBC, we take this stuff when a reporter gets an email like that very, very seriously. But we tend to have a lot of resources with this organization. And we recognize that, I've worked in local newsrooms before. And while there's a lot of passion and a lot of heart, it's always a question. Sometimes it just comes down to dollars. So that's another chilling effect. And then just simply the kind of mob mentality that can exist online, and that has, gone after not just journalists. I mean, we saw senators go after this week if they did not vote for Rick Scott. That was a story I covered. And so I think these are the things that we are seeing at the moment as some of the biggest threats to journalists. And I think in terms of exactly how we navigate and think about it, certainly it's an evolving and a moving target to a certain extent. We have to evolve as the attacks evolve. We have to evolve as various procedures or tactics continue out. And I think for the press club, at least, we are well positioned to be in a place to call out what we see as major abuses, to put a spotlight, to offer journalists community, offer them training, offer them information and access to how to keep themselves safe, how to keep themselves legal, what the laws are out there. I mean, it's not. There is. I don't want to sound too optimistic here because we are in an area of a lot of uncertainty. But at the same point, that's kind of why I take a lot of comfort right now in being a member of the National Press Club, that there are organizations and groups of journalists out there and other individuals who are thinking very hard about this stuff, about how to respond, about how to help, and about how to be there. And I would be lying if I said that the uncertainty wasn't a little bit scary. It absolutely is. But I think, particularly with the Aubuchon, as Bill said, and I'll say again, the commitment is not just to give an award, have everyone applaud and then walk away. The commitment is to be there for as long as we need to be there, for as long as we can help. And that has extended for some Aubuchon winners that we were helping more than 12 years later. And that commitment of being there, that community of journalists, and I think now with the Press Freedom Center too, with the ability to call upon and a wider coalition to help and support. I think there are folks out there to help. I think it's a matter of resources. It's a matter of communication. It's a matter of awareness that the attacks on the press have already started. They might not look how they do in dramatized TV shows, but if we're aware of what those attacks are and what they look like, we can start mobilizing and finding a way to fight back and to protect the freedom of the press.
Yeah. I want to just remind everyone that in just a few minutes we're gonna take some questions from you. If you have them in the chat function in the Zoom, if you click at the bottom of your window there, you can lodge a question to us in the chat, and we'll do our best to get to as many as we can. I want to ask you guys another question though, because I think one question as we as journalists have been pondering a lot of these very heavy questions and concerns over these past few days and weeks. I've gotten questions from non-journalists, sort of what can we do to help out? It brings me back to thinking about a bill that's actually before Congress. This is just one idea that I've had to mention to people, but it's called the Press Act. It's effectively it's a federal shield law that would protect journalists and keep them from having to reveal their sources and give them a little bit yet another tool in the toolbox, if you will. In a state like Mississippi that has not recognized any kind of shield law for local state journalists here in this state, that would be an amazing thing to point to in the courts, or if we were facing a lawsuit or whatever else. I'm wondering if Emily, you or Bill or both of you could talk a little bit about the Press Act. It passed in the House. It has been pending in the U.S. Senate, where, of course, we know we're about to enter a new term. They have some work they're hoping to finish up in the waning days of this current term, but the clock is ticking, as I understand it, on the Press Act. Either one of you could answer this question, but what's the status of that bill and why is it important?
You want to take it?
Yeah, sure. So just to give a little background, and Adam, thanks for asking about it. So basically, as you kind of said, the Press Act, it's going to protect journalists from being forced to give up their sources. It limits what records can be taken from journalists in terms of emails and phone records, and it is widely bipartisan. It actually, like when we say it passed the House via voice vote, which means that basically there wasn't a single person who came out and said, hey, I have a concern, or hey, I have a problem with this. In the Senate, too, we are seeing a very wide bipartisan coalition of members backing this bill. And Adam, you're absolutely right. This is about the clock, and this is about priorities. I will be honest, the fact that you're now going to see Schumer and the Senate Democrats pivot to getting as many judges as they can through, that is probably going to suck up a lot of bandwidth and a lot of time in the Senate. I think at this point, probably the best bet going forward would be something called unanimous consent. And the Senate actually every day, they basically at the very end of the session, if you watch C-SPAN, you'll see Schumer come out on the floor and basically have a list of bills, and they'll just kind of tick them off and get passed. And so basically, these are your non-controversial bills, like National Lobster Month. That gets approved via unanimous consent at the end of the day. But they also have had a number of serious bills that they have brought through this process, things like apprenticeship program, Nuclear Advancement Act. And so I think that would be the best potential thing for the Press Act. And I mean, in terms of what people can do to help, especially as someone who lives in DC and doesn't have a member of Congress who can actually vote on this stuff, calling your lawmakers, talking with your lawmakers, telling them the importance about this. I think there's so much noise in DC sometimes about things that need to get passed or that people would like to see passed, but it counts. I know the people who answer the phones there. They do listen, they do pass on stuff, they do kind of get a general sense. So I would say that that's certainly one thing to keep an eye on. And hopefully, at some point in the next month or so, this is something that could go. It's hard to say if it will, but the chances are not zero. And I think that's something we're just going to continue to watch.
I'm
I would
sorry,
just say
I muted myself. My dog, of course, decides right now to start barking. I'm sorry about that. Bill, how would you answer the question, sort of how can non-journalists help in this perilous and uncertain moment?
So just on the Press Act and that sort of issue, Congressman Raskin of Maryland, I think, is the primary author in the House. And that might not be somebody that you follow, but the general public can follow him through social or through research. And I think increasingly we are all going to need to become more familiar with those who are, standing up and trying to help support. And I don't say this because he's my congressman or because he's a Democrat, or that doesn't matter. Just who's doing good work on this stuff, and let's pay some attention to them, in that way. There is I think what Emily said about contacting your members of Congress, I think that is very useful and something that citizens can do. I would say, look, I think probably everybody who's on here is a subscriber to Mississippi Today, but supporting local media, and it may seem like a very basic thing, but it's very important. Subscribing to newspapers. This is something citizens can do and do, but I just think it's going to become more and more important, going forward. I would say just a quick thing. We took a slightly different approach at the press club to most of the other press freedom organizations. When Trump was elected, a lot of press freedom organizations did an ad hominem attack, like he's been bad, he said bad things about the press. All of this is true. I think the way we think about it is they're going to do things, and when they do things, let's focus on that. And I'm not sure anything is served by just blasting immediately. You have to be aware and you have to be ready, but just blasting immediately that he's a problem. We know that. I expect we're going to see, for example, that they'll ask that there's no longer a press corps at the White House, right? That'll be big, and citizens can definitely register their unhappiness with that, and not just to members of Congress, but they can go directly to the White House. And I think they need to hear from people if there's a policy like that that's clear, obvious, and visible. And too often, we don't get involved as citizens, right?
Sure. I'll add here, we of course, like I said earlier, we have had to face these pretty hefty legal bills ourselves for just this one major defamation case. But just as we've been on this call, I've gotten 2 phone calls from our lead attorney on something totally unrelated to that. And I think, sort of as a newsroom leader right now, I'm being extra careful about every word we publish in an article that may be considered sort of controversial or pushing the line of what the subject of any given piece may feel. And we're having to second guess and third guess every little thing right now. And what that means for us in newsrooms, particularly nonprofit newsrooms, is having to budget for additional sort of help, legal help on that stuff. So I have been, everybody on this call is a supporter of ours in some way, and we are so grateful. But if you're wondering how else you can help, tell your friends about us. Let them know we are fighting the fight for not just press freedom at large, but for the public's right to have basic information about how their leaders, elected officials or otherwise, are operating right now. And we need as much financial support as we can get. And for everyone on this call, thank you for that continued support and for sharing the good word.
I also think, Adam,
Terry.
that it's important to commend organizations that fight for freedoms of for freedoms for reporters, and those organizations that are willing to help us in these fights against laws that, try to stop us from doing the job that we're supposed to be doing.
I totally agree. Another reason we're grateful to have you guys at the Press Club here with us today. I want to pass over now to my colleague, our executive director, Mary Margaret White at Mississippi Today, who I think has been monitoring some questions for us that she wants to pose for us.
Yeah, thank you so much, Adam. This has been a great conversation. And Bill, I appreciate your note at the top of our conversation about how you feel that some of the most interesting and inspiring newsrooms right now are those in the nonprofit space. We're really proud to be the flagship nonprofit newsroom in Mississippi. But I do think that the nonprofit status may, in and of itself, ultimately be another threat to press freedom as we move forward. What investigations, audits, et cetera, into nonprofits, not just those in journalism, but in other spaces, could look like. With that said, one question we have for you is, how are you guys thinking about how newsroom leaders, like those of us, on the screen now, and journalists can prepare for additional barriers to reporting the news, or protecting themselves?
Well, so Emily had mentioned a variety of things that the club does related to training. So that's kind of how we try to help in DC around that. So there is a lot for reporters to learn and for executives to learn. And just as Adam mentioned that you have to watch sort of everything in this climate, I'm not sure that is fully diffused through the newsroom, like top to bottom. And I would say, I know it's probably, I think it is an issue with you guys as well. You have some kind of a union representation, as I understand it, at Mississippi Today now. I think the unions and the guilds need to be a partner in this, because it's, they're about protecting, jobs for their members, and the livelihood of the news organizations is at stake. So this is not just a leadership issue. It's a leadership and training issue that really it should matter to every person in the news organization, and that's sometimes hard to get to. I think we're getting there in a better way, but that's a big lift going forward. So the training, the understanding, the protection, all that stuff takes time and takes resources. So I'm not sure that answers your question, but I'd say it's a team effort. The general sense of protection. Emily, did you have something you wanted to add there?
I'm not sure how helpful it will be for this audience, but in terms of journalists being protected, I know Delete Me is a great tool. This ad is not sponsored by Delete Me. But just trying to kind of be cognizant of the information that is out there, the amount of access people have to you. I know it's hard as a reporter because I want everyone to have my phone number so they can contact me with great scoops and breaking news. I think it is kind of like being aware of your surroundings, being aware when you're out, who might be around you, if you're at a party, who you're talking with. I almost hate to inject that kind of paranoia in there, but I think there needs to be an awareness that, as you hear politicians and other public figures continue to put down the news and reporters and paint them as the opposition, you have to be smart, you have to be aware, and you kind of have to be cautious. And I will say that I think I've always been lucky to be in newsrooms where it was clear that I had the support and the backing of management, that I took it seriously. I actually had a conversation with my bureau chief kind of just right after the election, just bringing over some of the things that we've mentioned on this call in terms of things politicians have said about the media and times that violence has been encouraged against reporters. And it was just it meant a lot to hear him say the words that we will have your back and we will fight for you. And I've been in other newsrooms where that has been important as well. And even when I joined the press club, we do have monthly dues. And as a young journalist who was not making a lot, I remember being a bit hesitant to take that chunk out of my paycheck. And the argument that completely won me over was a dear friend and mentor of mine said that, there's never been a better time to join an organization like this that is committed to a free press, that is committed to journalists. And I think just being a part of this organization and knowing that I have the community and the backing behind me, I think is a very powerful tool to have at this moment in time.
I just would add, I don't think that we could overstate how prevalent this thinking is in journalism at large right now. I mean, the last week or so, I can't tell you the number of meetings that I've been invited to, kind of similar to this, where it's newsroom leadership. We were the Verite in Mississippi Today newsroom leadership just yesterday was on a call with what seemed like 200 or so newsroom leaders from across the country, having very intense conversations, all centered around how we can protect ourselves in this moment. This is a very real consideration that I've been, it's like I said earlier, it's heavy, it's tough, but I've been a little encouraged to sort of see the response and that community response, not just from journalism leaders, the newsroom leaders right now, but from organizations like the Press Club and others who are really going all out right now to think as strategically as we can about how to protect ourselves in this moment. So that's been really, really nice to have that community, but the concern remains, of course.
I want to share a comment from Charles in the chat. It says, I respect your deep knowledge and experience with threats to journalism. However, the issues you discussed are like presentation of a challenging patient in the ER. The temptation is choice of treatment. The issue is proper assessment and diagnosis of the patient's problem. Thank you for that, Charles. We appreciate that. This is kind of along the same lines, but you guys at the National Press Club are thinking day in and day out about how to engage everyday people, our readers, our listeners, our viewers, with the issues of press freedom. But what can we do to help our readers better understand this issue, to care about it, to be more informed? We're often reluctant as journalists to make ourselves the news, to write about the issues that are facing our profession, our community, our trade. Would love your thoughts on just how we can bring awareness in this moment.
I'll take a quick swing and then see if Emily or Terry want to say something. But you hit the nail on the head right there about journalists not wanting to put themselves at the center of the story and not wanting to talk about their problem or how to cover it and how to remain objective when you're the subject of news. And I think there is some getting over that needs to happen in newsrooms. And I'm not saying that in a critical way. I'm just saying that in a cultural way. There's been some good work, and I would suggest looking at that good work. Going back to say the Washington Post, when they had a journalist taken and they wanted to figure out how to manage that and cover it, and also keep running a newspaper. They had to take some hard looks at when you're being an advocate and when you're being a news organization. These are not easy questions. The Wall Street Journal just went through this with respect to the Evan Gershkovich case. And those are things are like 10 years apart. And you can really see the difference if you study them as to what the Journal did, versus what the Post did in terms of just amount of coverage, focus of coverage, the emphasis it was given, the number of places within the paper that these issues were being discussed. It was encouraging to see that we made progress in this way. I don't know if people understand this, but there are very, very few news organizations that have a person dedicated to covering press freedom or primarily focused on it. So I would say the general posture is that news organizations are not prepared to cover this as a story. I mean, they're not like staffed up for it, geared up for it. It's not I don't want to say it's not a priority. It's a priority in our hearts, but it's not really in our, in the work. And so, this, the public is taking its cues from the paper, right? From the site. And so, you're the victim, but you're also the leader. This is it's a hard one, but I think more and more people are journalism is getting over its reluctance to cover itself as the issues that confront it become more and more existential. Right? And I don't want to overstate it, but we have to put some of the prior thinking to the side. And I'm not saying get rid of objectivity. I'm just saying it's okay to cover this. It's okay to cover these issues because when the free press is no longer available, we do not have a democracy. And this is a problem that readers want us to tell them is coming. Terry, did you want to say something?
Terry, you're muted again. Sorry.
I wanted to say that I was, that we're reluctant to cover ourselves and cover the stuff that scares us as journalists. Because in this environment, over the course of the last few years, I think we worry that there won't be anybody who feels sympathetic for us as well. So that's, that leaves us between a rock and a hard place.
I'll on that, let me add one more question from our audience. This really plays into what you've just said, Terry. This is from Joanne. We are wondering about youth journalism and addressing how to engage the younger generations in reading papers and being engaged in journalism and the issues you are addressing.
Yeah, we've lost a generation or a danger of losing a generation, I think. In some ways, younger folks are better informed than any of us were when we were their age. They know more about global issues, certainly. They're better at doing same-day research, that kind of thing. But the skill that we had, growing up of reading, a newspaper and in all that entails is really a skill that's, been it's been lost. It's been replaced with something new, and in some ways better, this searching and bouncing around a site. But that very focused work of reading a newspaper, let's say, and finding some things that you weren't looking for, but that are important for your understanding of the world, that part's not going on. And, I know my own kids, when I would say I was reading an article, and they would say, Dad, when you say read the article, do you mean read it all the way to the end? And I realized that we're not talking about the same thing. So there's a lot of glancing and there's a lot of skimming and that sort of thing, and so it is an issue. Anyway, sorry.
And we live in an era, I'll just add, where our attention is being commodified in a way that I don't think it's ever been before. And I think often for the average American, especially for my generation, the millennials, and then the younger generations, trying to understand the news is like walking into a supermarket, but there are no nutrition labels on anything. And it's just boxes and colors and words and sounds. And it's not exactly clear which is healthy for you and which is good for you. Obviously, some people tell you this is good or this is bad, or not legacy media, not mainstream media, well, not fringe stuff, well, not this person. How do you know? Da, 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 da. I think part of it's got to be education. I know that that's not an easy or simple answer. I know folks who have been with organizations that cover news literacy that I've talked to about how difficult it's been. I also think that, as the news industry, as other industries do, we have to keep an open mind, and we have to be ready to evolve and to sort of rethink how we're reporting, what we're saying. I think the for-profit newsrooms, non-for-profit newsrooms rather, are a great innovation when it comes to thinking about the future of the press and what that looks like. I would say that, I talked with a room full of college students and I asked them how they got their news. And I think almost everyone said that it was, TikTok and social media. So how do we think about working within those spaces? How do we think about being able to get the news out, not just in an article format, but maybe in a short video or TikTok format or an email or a newsletter as well? How do we think about how we are presenting the news? Are we doing it at least in a way that it's accessible to someone who's coming in at the ground floor? I will often talk to my family members about what I'm doing, and I'll say a thing like, oh, blah, 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 like Mitch McConnell, and they have to stop me and they're like, who's that? And so kind of rethinking where we're at, how we're meeting people, is I think a key part of it, and just recognizing, I think that again the landscape has changed. I take Charles's point very well that we're looking for some ways for treatment while we're still trying to fully understand the issue. I think sometimes I feel like journalism needs a really good PR campaign to help win back the public trust. But I know that it's not just journalism that's undergoing this. A number of our long esteemed institutions are as well. And I think that both Bill and Terry make a good point that we can't be afraid to be the story. And I think to a certain extent, we can't be afraid to sell ourselves, to talk about what we're doing, to hype the things that we have done, and to tout our own importance, which is difficult for me to say as a Midwesterner. That's never been my style. But again, evolving with what's coming.
Yeah. Great stuff there. I want to pass it back to Deep South Today's CEO and President Warwick Sabin for just a quick close here. But thank you, guys.
Yeah, and thank you all for a fantastic discussion. That was really terrific. I also want to thank our audience for participating in today's important conversation and for your support of our newsrooms, Mississippi Today and Verite News. We do say it all the time, but it probably could never be enough. You do make our work possible, and we couldn't be more grateful to all of you. For those of you who are new to us, you can learn more about our mission at deepsouthtoday.org. And of course, you can read the incredible work of our journalists at MississippiToday.org and VeriteNews.org. So let me once again thank our panelists and wish all of you a really great rest of your day. Thank you all for being here.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thanks so much for coordinating all of this. This is an absolutely fantastic conversation.